Once, on a day that began like any other, under a sky the color of a dull nickel, the city of Meridian exhaled a slow, tired breath. The morning rush was a symphony of honking horns and the hiss of air brakes from buses that groaned under the weight of their discontented cargo. In the cramped, cluttered bullpen of the 12th Precinct, Detective Elias Vance was already on his third cup of coffee, a bitter brew that did little to cut through the fog in his head. The coffee was a prop, a ritual. The real fuel was the low, simmering anger that had been his constant companion for the better part of 2 years. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind of day that blurs into the next, filled with paperwork on petty thefts and the lingering unsolved ghosts of bigger cases. The calm, however, was a lie. It was always a lie in Meridian. The city thrived on the illusion of order, a thin veneer painted over a roiling core of chaos. And Elias Vance, a man with weary eyes and a spine that still insisted on being straight, was about to have his day on, his life torn open by the master of that chaos. The call came in at 10:17 a.m. It wasn't the frantic, staticky burst of a patrol car alert. It was a direct comm line to Captain Moretti's office. Vance saw the old man's posture change through the glass walls. The way his shoulders stiffened and his hand went to his forehead, a familiar gesture of impending migraine. Moretti's door opened, and his voice, gravelly from 40 years of nicotine and shouting, cut through the bullpen's hum. "Vance, my office." "Now?" Vance set his mug down, the click of ceramic on wood sounding final. He navigated the maze of desks, ignoring the curious glances from the other detectives. He knew that tone. It was the tone that preceded something big, something ugly. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old coffee and anxiety. Moretti didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, a mountain of a man starting to erode at the edges. "Meridian Central Bank," he said, dispensing with any preamble. "He's there." Vance didn't need to ask who he was. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. "Robeer, who else?" He called it in himself. "Dialed the main line here. Asked for me by name. Told me to send my best. I'm assuming that's not a compliment." Moretti's jaw was tight. "He's got hostages, dozens of them. The whole damned bank." The name hung in the room between them. Robert Irons, known to the press and the terrified public as Robeer. It was a moniker he'd chosen himself. A nonsense word that had come to symbolize a particular brand of terrifying theatrical crime. He wasn't a thug, he was a performer. His heists were less about the money and more about the statement, the flawlessly executed chaos. He'd been a ghost for 18 months since the fiasco at the Jewel Exchange, where he'd vanished into thin air, leaving Vance and a full SWAT team staring at an empty vault and a single mocking playing card, the Joker, taped to the door. That card was now sealed in an evidence locker, a permanent monument to Vance's failure. "He asked for you, specifically," Moretti said, his eyes locking onto Vance's. "Said he'd only talk to you. No negotiators, no tactical commanders. Just Detective Elias Vance." The cold knot in Vance's gut turned to ice. This was it. This was the invitation to the rematch he'd been both dreading and craving. He gave a short, sharp nod. "I'm on my way." The drive to Meridian Central was a blur of flashing lights and screaming sirens. The wide financial artery of the city was choked with patrol cars, their light bars throwing frantic blue and red reflections against the glass and steel of skyscrapers. A perimeter had been established blocks away. News vans, like vultures smelling carrion, were already setting up their satellite dishes, the reporters preening for the cameras. Vance parked his unmarked sedan and stepped out into the controlled bedlam. The air crackled with radio chatter and the low thrum of a generator powering the mobile command center. He spotted Lieutenant Chen, the head of the SWAT team, a compact, efficient woman whose face was grim as she studied a blueprint of the bank spread out on the hood of an armored truck. "Vance," she said, not looking up. "Glad you're here. Our boy's been busy." She tapped the blueprint. "He hit at 10:05, right after the morning deposit rush. We estimate 30 to 40 hostages inside. He sealed the main doors from the inside, some kind of industrial magnet lock. We've got no visual, no sound from inside. He's dark." The only contact was that call to Moretti. Vance stared at the bank. It was a fortress of neoclassical design, all imposing columns and heavy stone, now transformed into a sinister stage. Every window was dark. It was a silent, ominous box. "What are his demands?" "That's the thing," Chen said, finally looking at him. "He hasn't made any, not yet. He just said he was open for business and that he was waiting for you." A young officer jogged up, holding out a cell phone. "Sir, it's for you. He's on the bank's main line. Patched it through to this." Vance took the phone. It felt heavy in his hand. He took a breath, steadying himself, then put it to his ear. "This is Detective Vance." The voice that came through was calm, cultured, and edged with a dark amusement that was instantly, infuriatingly familiar. "Elias, so good of you to join us. I was beginning to think you'd stood me up. Irons, or do you prefer Robeer?" A soft, chilling laugh. "Robeer will do. It has a certain theatricality, don't you think? Now, let's dispense with the pleasantries. I am sure Lieutenant Chen is already plotting ways to have her men burst in here and turn this into a bloodbath. I'd like to avoid that. I'm not a monster, Elias. I'm an artist, and an artist requires an audience. What do you want, Robert? Vance kept his voice flat, professional, betraying none of the rage that was heating his blood. First, I want you to look at the second-story window, the one directly above the main entrance. Do you see it? Vance's eyes snapped upward. The window was dark. I see it. Watch for a moment. Nothing happened. Then, the blinds snapped open. A man in a suit, his face pale with terror, was shoved against the glass. Behind him, a figure clad entirely in black, face obscured by a smooth, featureless white mask, held him there. The mask was utterly expressionless, a blank slate that was more terrifying than any grotesque grin. It was Robeer's signature. That's Mr. Henderson, Robeer's voice purred in his ear. Senior Vice President of Loans. He approved my mortgage application once. Took weeks. Very poor customer service. Vance's grip tightened on the phone. Don't. I'm not going to hurt him, Elias. Not yet. This is merely a demonstration, a show of credibility. I have the means, the will, and the stage. You are my primary audience, but I'm a generous performer. I've decided to let you have a front row seat. Alone, you will walk to the main doors. You will be admitted. You will be scanned for weapons and, if you have so much as a paperclip on you, Mr. Henderson here will learn to fly without an airplane. Do you understand? Vance's mind raced. It was a trap. It was the most obvious trap in the history of traps. He'd be walking into a fortified building, alone, against an unpredictable genius with a bank full of human shields. Moretti and Chen were staring at him, their eyes wide, shaking their heads vehemently. And if I refuse? Vance asked, playing for time. Then I begin sending people out, Robeer said, his voice losing its playful edge and turning cold, metallic. Not walking. I will demonstrate the law of gravity on a human body every 15 minutes until you arrive. The clock starts now. Detective, you have 60 seconds to decide. Don't keep the crowd waiting. The line went dead. Vance lowered the phone. He looked at the expectant, terrified faces of Moretti and Chen. He wants me to go in. Alone. Absolutely not, Moretti barked. It's suicide, Vance. That's what he wants. He's been obsessed with you since the exchange. This is him finishing it. He'll start killing hostages, Vance said, his voice quiet but firm. He was already unclipping his holster, handing his service weapon to a stunned SWAT officer. He emptied his pockets. Keys, wallet, phone. He's not bluffing. He's never bluffed. He does what he says he'll do. It's the only thing you can count on with him. Chen stepped closer. Elias, think. We can stall. We can try to get a sniper angle. Breach from the roof. There's no time. Vance looked back at the window. Mr. Henderson was still pressed against the glass, a fly in a web. He's got the high ground, the initiative, and a building full of insurance. I'm the only thing he wants. I have to go. It wasn't bravery. It was the opposite. It was the culmination of 18 months of guilt, of chasing a shadow, of seeing the taunting Joker card every time he closed his eyes. This was his penance. This was his chance to end it. Before Moretti could protest further, Vance turned and started walking toward the bank. The air seemed to grow still around him. The chatter of the radios, the murmurs of the cops, the distant whir of news helicopters had all faded into a dull roar in his ears. His footsteps on the pavement were the only sound that mattered. Each one was a step closer to the man who had hijacked his career, his peace, his life. The massive bronze doors of the bank looked impregnable. As he approached, a smaller person-sized door within the larger one clicked and swung inward, revealing only darkness. He took one last look at the world of light and order behind him, then stepped across the threshold. The door shut behind him with a heavy, final thud. He was in a grand, marble-lined lobby, but it was transformed. The usual bright, welcoming space was dim, lit only by emergency exit signs and the cold, electric blue of computer monitors that had been left on. The air was cold, smelling of ozone, sweat, and fear. And it was silent. Eerily, profoundly silent. His eyes adjusted to the gloom. Dozens of people were on the floor, lying face down, their hands secured behind their backs with plastic zip ties. They were perfectly still, like pieces on a chessboard. Standing at strategic points around the room were 4 figures, all dressed in the same black tactical gear, all wearing the same expressionless white masks. They held compact submachine guns, trained not on the hostages, but on him. Arms out, detective, a voice said. It wasn't Robeer's. It was electronically distorted, coming from one of the masked figures. Slow turn. Vance complied, spreading his arms and turning in a circle. One of the gunmen approached him, moving with a predatory grace. He patted Vance down with brutal efficiency, his hands checking every possible hiding place. Finding nothing, he stepped back and gave a sharp nod. A sound echoed through the vast space. A single, slow clap. It came from the mezzanine level, overlooking the lobby. Vance looked up. There he was, Robert Irons. He wasn't wearing the mask. He leaned against the polished brass railing, looking down like a patron at an art gallery. He was younger than Vance, in his early 30s, with sharp, intelligent features, dark hair swept back, and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He was dressed not in tactical gear, but in a impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit. looking for all the world like he owned the bank. In a way, at this moment, he did. "Welcome," Robeer said, his voice echoing pleasantly in the hushed hall. "Thank you for coming, Elias. I do appreciate punctuality. It shows respect." He began to descend the sweeping staircase, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous room. He stopped on the bottom step, still elevated above Vance, forcing the detective to look up at him. "You've gone to a lot of trouble for a chat," Vance said, keeping his voice level. "Trouble," Robeer chuckled, spreading his hands to indicate the trussed-up hostages, the armed guards, the conquered bank. "This isn't trouble, detective. This is the unveiling, the grand opening. For the past 18 months, I've been working on my masterpiece. And you are the final piece of the puzzle. The critic whose review matters most? I'm not here to review your work, Irons. I'm here to end it." "Oh, it will end," Robeer said, his smile turning icy, "but not before the final act." He stepped off the stairs and walked toward Vance, stopping just a few feet away. He looked him up and down, not with hostility, but with a strange, appraising curiosity. "You look tired, Elias. The job wearing you down, the endless chase, the little failures that pile up until they become a mountain? Let's talk about the hostages," Vance said, refusing to be drawn into his game. "You got me in here? Now what's your demand? A car? A plane? You know how this works." Robeer laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that was utterly out of place. "A plane? How dreadfully. No, I don't want to leave, Elias. I want to stay. I want us to have a conversation, a real one, man to man. Detective too, artist." He gestured to 2 chairs that had been placed in the center of the lobby, a small table between them. It was surreal, a staged intimacy in the middle of a nightmare. "Sit, please." One of the gunmen nudged Vance forward with the barrel of his weapon. Vance walked to the chair and sat, his back straight, his eyes never leaving Robeer. The master thief took the seat opposite him, crossing his legs as if they were at a cafe. "You've been chasing me for a long time," Robeer began, steepling his fingers. "You've studied my work, the first national job, the museum gala, the jewel exchange. You've pieced together the patterns, the methodologies, but you've never understood the why, have you? You're a thief," Vance stated. "You steal things. The why is usually money." Robeer sighed, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "See, that's the failure of imagination that plagues your entire profession. You reduce the spectacular to the mundane. If it were about money, I'd be on a beach somewhere, wouldn't I? I wouldn't keep coming back to this grimy city to put on a show. No, Elias. The money is a prop. The security systems are a puzzle. The police," he gestured to Vance, "are the audience. But the true purpose, the heart of the performance, is the revelation." "What revelation?" "That it can be done," Robeer said, his eyes lighting up with fervor. "That the rules, the walls, the gates, the men with guns and badges, that it's all a stage set. It can be dismantled by a mind that sees the world not for what it is, but for what it can be manipulated into. I walk into the most secure places in this city, and I show everyone watching that their safety is an illusion. Their money is just paper. Their power is a fiction. I am the one who makes it real by proving it is fake. Don't you see the beauty in that? The purity?" Vance stared at him. He'd profiled Irons as a narcissist, a high-functioning sociopath with a god complex. Listening to him now, he realized it was far more pathological. This wasn't just a criminal. This was a revolutionary of chaos, a prophet of anarchy. "You're talking about terrorizing innocent people to make a philosophical point?" Vance said. Innocent Robeer's smile vanished. "Are they? Look at them." He gestured to the prone figures on the floor. "Bankers, loan officers, investors. They built the cage. Elias, they profit from the illusion of security while selling the reality of debt and dependency. They are the architects of the very system I'm dismantling. There are no innocents here, only players and pawns. And you are the wild card." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Which is why you're here. The jewel exchange. That was magnificent, wasn't it? You were so close. You had the building surrounded. You had my escape routes, the ones you knew about, covered. You were brilliant, and I was more brilliant. I need you to understand that. I need you to appreciate it, because today's performance is for you." A cold dread began to seep into Vance's bones. This wasn't a bank heist, it was a therapy session from hell, a duel of ideologies. Robeer hadn't lured him here to kill him. He'd lured him here to break him, to force him to acknowledge his superiority. "What happens now?" Vance asked. "Now," Robeer said, leaning back and checking an expensive, slender watch on his wrist, "we wait for the next act. The authorities outside will be getting restless. They'll try something predictably probably a thermal scan to locate us, then a breach from the roof or the rear loading bay. My men are prepared for that. It will be messy and unnecessary, which is why, to move things along, I'm going to give them a little incentive." He nodded to one of his masked lieutenants. The man walked over to where Mr. Henderson, the loan officer, was lying on the floor. He hauled him to his feet. "No," Vance said, starting to rise. A gun was immediately pressed to the back of his head, forcing him back down into the chair. "Watch," Robeer commanded, his voice soft but absolute. "This is the consequence of their lack of imagination. Not yours. Not yet." The masked man escorted a sobbing Mr. Henderson toward the bank's main vault door, a massive circular slab of steel that stood open. Instead of going inside, the guard led him to a small, reinforced door next to it, the safe deposit room. He opened the door and pushed Henderson inside, then closed and locked it from the outside. What was the point of that? Vance asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. A timeout for poor customer service, Robeer said with a shrug. Now, we wait. The minutes ticked by, stretched into an agony of silence. Vance could feel the fear radiating from the hostages on the floor. He could feel the weight of the guns trained on him. He could feel Robeer's eyes on him, studying him, drinking in his tension. Then, the sound they were waiting for came. A distant, muffled crump, followed by the faint sound of yelling from somewhere deep within the bank. The SWAT team had breached. Robeer didn't even flinch. He simply smiled. Right on schedule. He raised his voice, addressing his men. Phase 2. Gentlemen, if you please. Two of the masked gunmen immediately moved toward the rear of the lobby, covering the corridors that led deeper into the bank. The other two remained, one covering the hostages, the other covering Vance. Gunfire erupted from the hallway, showed controlled bursts from the robbers, submachine guns, answered by the louder booms of SWAT team rifles. The sound was deafening in the marble hall. Vance flinched, his every instinct screaming at him to take cover, to act, but the gun at his head held him frozen. The firefight was brief and brutal. After a few intense seconds, it fell silent. A moment later, one of Robeer's men returned, giving a thumbs-up signal. Robeer nodded, then looked at Vance. And thus, the first wave of pawns is swept from the board. They never learn. They think force is the answer to every question. It's so crude. A new voice crackled from a radio on the table between them, Chen's voice, tight with anger and stress. Irons, robber. Do you copy? We know you can hear me. We've secured the rear. Your escape is cut off. Release a hostage is a sign of good faith. Let's talk. Robeer picked up the radio, his movement leisurely. Lieutenant Chen, your tactical acumen is as subtle as a sledgehammer. You've lost 4 of your men in a futile exercise. I have not lost a single one of mine. We are not here to talk. We are here for the performance. And you are interrupting the third act. What do you want? Chen's voice demanded. I want you to listen, Robeer said. Then he set the radio down and nodded to the guard near the safe deposit room. The guard unlocked the door and pulled out Mr. Henderson. The man was trembling, tears streaming down his face. The guard didn't lead him back to the group. Instead, he forced him to his knees in the center of the lobby, in full view of the main doors. Irons don't, Vance shouted, surging to his feet. The gun pressed harder into his skull. Robeer ignored him, his attention on the doors. He raised his voice, projecting it to be heard by the cops outside. You tried to breach my stage. That is a critique I do not accept. The price of a bad review is death. He nodded. The masked guard raised his submachine gun. No. The word was a silent scream in Vance's mind. A single shot rang out. It wasn't the burst of automatic fire Vance expected. It was a precise, singular crack, and it didn't come from the guard's weapon. The guard's head snapped back. A small, perfect red hole appeared in the center of his white mask. He crumpled to the floor like a sack of stones. For a fraction of a second, everything was frozen in stunned silence. Then, chaos. The other guards spun, trying to find the source of the shot. Robeer's cool composure shattered into a mask of pure, incandescent rage. Sniper, he roared. They have an angle. How? But it was impossible. The windows were all reinforced. The blinds had been drawn. There was no line of sight from outside. Vance didn't stop to think. The gun was no longer at his head. Instinct, training, and 18 months of pent-up fury took over. He launched himself at Robeer, tackling him around the waist and driving him to the hard marble floor. They landed in a tangled heap of expensive wool and raw fury. The remaining robbers, disoriented by the loss of their comrade and their leader being attacked, opened fire, but they didn't know what to shoot at. Their bullets sparked off marble and shattered computer monitors. Vance ignored the gunfire, his world reduced to the man beneath him. He drove a fist into Robeer's face, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage. Robeer snarled, bucking and twisting with surprising strength. He brought a knee up into Vance's gut, driving the air from his lungs. Vance grunted, his grip loosening for a critical second. Robeer scrambled out from under him, his nose bleeding, his perfect hair disheveled. His eyes burned with a hatred that was far more human than his previous theatrical malice. You ruined it, he spat. The artist furious at his critic. You ruined the performance. He clawed at his ankle and came up with a small, sleek pistol Vance hadn't known he had. He aimed it point blank at Vance's face. This is it, Vance thought. This is how it ends. Another shot rang out. This one hit Robeer's extended arm. The small pistol clattered to the floor as he screamed, clutching his shattered wrist. Vance rolled, looking for the source of the shot. High up in the shadows of the mezzanine, a figure moved. It was another person in black tactical gear, but this one wasn't wearing the expressionless mask. This one's face was covered by a balaclava, only the eyes visible, and those eyes were looking directly at Vance. The figure held a long-range rifle with a sophisticated scope. He gave Vance a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. An ally? Arrival. Vance had no idea, but the opportunity was there. With Robeer disarmed and wounded, and his guards distracted by the mysterious sniper on the mezzanine, the power in the room had shifted. The hostages, sensing the change, began to stir, their muffled cries growing louder. Vance saw his chance. He lunged for the radio on the table. "Chen, this is Vance. The leader is down. The main lobby is compromised. Move in now, now." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned to see Robeer scrambling backward on the floor, clutching his bleeding arm. Trying to get to his feet, his performance was over. Now it was just a desperate man trying to escape. The main doors shuddered as a battering ram hit them from the outside. Once, twice. On the third impact, the specialized lock gave way with a shriek of tearing metal. The doors exploded inward. Light and sound flooded the dark lobby. SWAT teams poured in, yelling, "Police, get down on the ground." The remaining robbers, outnumbered and outflanked, dropped their weapons and put their hands in the air. The hostages were sobbing with relief as officers rushed to cut their bonds. Vance's eyes never left Robeer. He saw the man look at the chaos, at his captured men, at the end of his grand design, and in his eyes, Vance didn't see defeat. He saw a promise, a vow. Then Robeer did something unexpected. He smiled through the blood on his face. He looked directly at Vance, and though he couldn't be heard over the din, he clearly mouthed two words. Next time, a SWAT officer tackled him, driving him face first into the cold marble, cuffing his hands behind his back. The siege was over. The monster was captured. Vance stood amidst the swirling chaos, his body aching, his mind reeling. Paramedics rushed in to attend to the hostages. Cops were everywhere. Moretti burst through the door, his face a mixture of relief and fury. But Vance wasn't looking at any of them. He was scanning the mezzanine, searching the shadows. The mysterious sniper was gone, vanished, as if he'd never been there at all. Who was he? Why did he help? And whose side was he on? Vance looked down at Robeer, who was being hauled to his feet, his suit ruined, his arm in a makeshift sling, but his head held high, his eyes still burning with that insane, unwavering light. The performance was over. The audience was applauding. The critic had given his review. But as the cops led Robeer away, and as the city of Meridian began to celebrate the end of its nightmare, Elias Vance knew, with a cold certainty that settled deep in his soul, that this wasn't an ending, it was an intermission, and the next act was already being written.